Hello, and welcome to the So Emotional podcast. Here on the cast, we discuss everything emotions through the lens of attachment, the nervous system, and internal parts work. We're a little irreverent and like to have fun exploring the emotional issues and dynamics that interest us. So come along and hang out. Let's explore the fascinating lands of emotions.
Hi, everyone. Welcome again to the So Emotional podcast. I'm Angela Wetzel with Epic Initiator Coaching. I'm a life and relationship coach. This is also your host, Nick Carl. He's an experienced somatic experiencer. He's quite good at it, I must say. I thought you were flicking me off. I was like, what did I do to deserve that? And and we're here. I was like, okay, some interesting hostility. Let's talk about that. And we're here to remove the stigma and enigma around the emotional journey and to talk about whatever the fuck we want to talk about that interests us, but that may also serve humanity. I think that's the goal. Moving my mic, right?
Okay.
All right. So for today's topic, why did we pick this topic? Probably because of a couple things. Just working with clients and doing parts work, Nick also holding space and doing his somatic experiencing work. Coming across younger parts, anywhere from the ages of like 2 and almost up to 30, maybe 30. And I've found that some of the older parts are a lot harder to convince because they're so intelligent and they already have so much evidence about what life is. And when I say evidence, I'm going to use air quotes, evidence,
Right.
Because something that's really, really important to talk about is the self-fulfilling prophecy and what that really means. And also the difference between what we create when we're unconscious and creating timelines from that unconscious place. And I'll talk a little bit more about timelines in a second. And the difference between when we're in alignment with our values, with our true self, with source energy, and we're creating, and what timeline we create from that place. And by timeline, I really just mean if you were to have a trigger and then you were to react from that trigger, that would set you off in a certain direction, right? And usually our triggers come from protections that we have around things that happened to us in the past that will send us off. That these triggers are parts of ourselves that are trying to say, hey, look out, similar thing happening again, protect yourself now. And so there's like an automatic, very quick response that'll happen, almost like a knee-jerk reaction. Often you can find yourself screaming at someone before you even realize you're screaming and being like, oh, I'm doing this thing again. And maybe you don't even have awareness of the trigger. But if you listen to those triggers and protections and you keep following that, where do you end up? And if you ask the question and you really think about it, what you'll notice is that your life becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, and usually you'll feel more stuck. But in some ways, you will find yourself in a very predictable situation where nothing changes. And it is like that quote, really like living a life of quiet desperation. And on the other hand, if we're really in alignment with our truth and our own sense of self and our values and what we really find important and our own sense of expansion and who we want to become, that if we're moving in that direction, it's also a challenging direction, but by taking a step and walking through our fear and doing this work to really understand our emotions as guides, discerning, using our triggers as trailheads. And I don't even know if that's something I came up with, or I feel like I might have borrowed that from like Azria and Ben Becker from their book Becoming, just because I thought it was good. But that if we're consciously aware and we stay aware of our creative power in that process of what we're doing, then that's an entirely different life we're creating as well. And so it's like, you have to ask yourself, when I'm making this decision to be conscious or unconscious, like those are both decisions, to cultivate awareness and to stay asleep, right? The blue pill, the red pill. I think. Is that the way it goes? Is that the blue pill, the red pill?
Yeah.
Right? Stay asleep is blue. So you always have a choice, and you have to really think about what you're creating from those places. And so did I describe the self-fulfilling prophecy yet? I don't think I went into it yet, did I?
Mm-mm.
No. Okay, so timeline is one thing. The self-fulfilling prophecy is another, and it's because, like I said, these adult parts have experience, like they start to collect evidence of things that are true, right? But what's often not taken into account is that the evidence that we're collecting has actually come from a lived experience of unconsciousness, of not being connected or aligned with
Right.
that future, but almost creating creating by default, unconsciously just reacting to life, not consciously creating. And so these parts of ourselves can, even probably until we lay down and give up the ghost, as they say, die, we can have stories of these things that are happening to us if we fail to take some responsibility over our conscious awareness and don't decide to co-create. And so I view it as a self-fulfilling prophecy is telling a story about what you're afraid is going to happen. And what happens is you will then focus on that, what you don't want to happen. And then what ends up happening is, because all your energy is focused on that protection and that fear, you are now on the frequency of fear and protection. And then what you will get is more circumstances that put you in that place. And then your conscious mind again will say, look, see, I knew it was going to happen, not taking account for the fact that you are actually actively participating in the creation of that, whether you know it or not. And I will compare it to, if you view your past as like a fiery car crash, and it's like driving your car, but only looking through the rear view mirror where you see the fiery car crash, and you hope to avoid all future fiery car crashes by solely focusing on the rear view mirror. And your likelihood of ending up in another fiery car crash when you do that is exponential. And it is likely, and then you will say, see, I knew it was going to happen. And then it happened again, because what
Right.
you needed to do was to focus on what's in front of you, the wide space, the unknown, where you haven't been before, and where there is no debris and there are no car wrecks yet. And do your best to like stay focused in that area so that you have a chance of creating something new, a new story. And so that was part of, yeah, that's why that's why we wanted to talk about this, of course, because we somehow found ourselves on this topic. And we
So
both,
I think right off the bat, the things that it makes me think is that getting that type of consciousness to be aware, to start asking questions about these motivations gets pretty tricky, right?
yes.
Especially as we kind of get like I think that you are, like you mentioned it before, that working with like younger parts or even experiencing younger parts seem to be a little bit more black and white, which is like, my young parts are just like, it's like a just like a crying energy, like a crying out. It has a
Mhm.
certain energetic tone, an emotional tone that is sort of like known, right? But getting up into things like I don't know, I think about like my own common sense, things I would never do, like these are common sense, which are
Mhm.
things which are, conclusions that I've come to, just but like I would just never do that, that comes from a little bit older perspective.
What do you mean? Like, do you have an example of something like that? Because I'm trying to like grasp onto what you're saying.
Um,
Do you mean like maybe putting yourself out there vulnerably to somebody that you had strong feelings about? Like, oh, I would just never do that because that's dumb. Is that like an
yeah,
example of?
yeah, or I think a little bit like what we approached, like what we talked about, like approach when we talk about like like I went over and tried to talk to some it's not the right word, but
Oh,
like a
yeah.
rock star or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
It's like or I think about that like like a really famous person or something, just like walking, it's like part of me is just like, no, I would just never do that. It's like, why would I ever do that? Why would I put myself in that kind of like vulnerable position?
Right. Because that part has a story of like whatever the story
Yeah,
is
well,
has
and the
its
story would be
stories.
just be like, like I don't have anything to offer that person. Like, they
Whoops.
have people coming up to them all the time. You know, they're not going to get anything from me. So there isn't any kind of way that like we could have anything meaningful, you know? So I just won't bother.
Right. And what's interesting is that part, if you were to follow the voice of that part, you
Mm-hmm.
would never take the risk and then you would never have any new evidence because you just wouldn't do the thing.
Right. So
So
this
then
is
you
a,
would,
yeah.
yeah,
So this is a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Right. Because I've already
that would,
prophesized.
it
Yeah. I've
would
already
be if you,
had
it
not.
would be if you one listen to that voice and don't try to do anything different, one, or two, if you have another part that gets into the mix and causes something else to happen where it like botches it if you do it, you know what I'm
Mm,
saying? It's
right.
like if you have a part that keeps you from doing it, success, it's still a self-fulfilling prophecy because you never get new evidence and you stay safe,
Okay.
right? But
Yes.
then if you do attempt to move in that direction, if you have parts that are afraid of what's going to happen, it's almost like the people that are so afraid of confrontation get so anxious around confrontation that when they do speak to someone, there's already an immediate like heated argument because it's like they end up creating it with their energy of fearful expectation.
Right. And I imagine if you have that in your being, right, then, you know, so, I tried to talk to this rock star the other day. And
Mm-hmm.
I guess the self-fulfilling prophecy works in that case because, I got about two sentences out and then a part comes up and, I kind of locked up. I did lock up. And, you know, I was aware that those pieces would be there, but I just wanted to sort of like, I'm just poking, I'm just testing. But I
Mm-hmm.
imagine that like, if you already have that conclusion and you've already ran into enough circumstances in your life to kind of test the hypothesis and know this about you, like know, like that knowing because you've tested it as an adult or all the way throughout your life. Um, I think these are then the parts that are older because they have all these confirming circumstances of you as an
Mm-hmm.
adult, and it's just like, no, I would never do that, or I know how this goes, right?
Right.
Which then that to me is really tricky because, um,
It is.
well, I think about, okay, well, what's the first step in doing something different, right? And it's like, we're going to, okay, well, like immediately to me, it feels like we're already on a growth edge if we're going to like do something different.
Yeah.
Because if these things are common in my mind, say I know them about myself, like working against the grain or like seeing something different. Because in a situation like that, like I don't believe, and this is part of the equation, like I don't believe that I chose that, right? I believe that it's just a part of like who I am and how everything is, like how the universe is structured. Um, which I think doesn't leave a lot of room for creativity or for different consequence. So it's like we're going to step out of a world of place that I believe. Well, that feels pretty scary, really.
Yeah. Right. Well, because then I think we kind of create a reality of something that feels stable that we are sure of.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes that stable ground that we're using as our reality is a shitty reality of things that we actually don't want. But
Right.
it's that because you can get into like down a slippery slope like really quickly if you think about, okay, what's real and what do I have to hold on to in this life?
Right.
And so when it comes to some of these older parts, they're not necessarily impressed when they know that time has passed necessarily, because you're just another adult as far as they're concerned and just as lost in the sauce as they were at that age,
Right.
more than likely. So then it's like, what's the answer or the way out in that case, besides like a mentor, which may be helpful if they even had the capacity to trust somebody
Mm.
to take their hand as they step out of their comfort zone into this like wildly new unfamiliar space. But even then, like, isn't necessarily enough, because you can have parts that don't trust other people, and then you can say, well, they're clearly underreacting to whatever I have going on, and so I'm not getting the response I need, so clearly they don't know what the fuck's going on, and I'm still not safe. And so in the end, like, I think we were kind of talking about this a couple podcasts ago, just about like how the world and our ability to like count on certain things like being the same, or trusting like certain news sources or facts or whatever, like that whole illusion or paradigm is like gone. Like there used to be a perception that like, oh, you could pick up the paper and just get the truth. But when you look at it, human beings are always going to filter perspective through their own trigger spheres, unconsciousness, like whatever. And so you're always getting like a fractal or a version of what the truth is. And unless you're in alignment, there's going to be some distortion that exists in what's presented to you. And it's like, what are you going to use to try to figure out what the truth is? And like, this is, I think, one of the biggest things is like how you get there is, I think, awareness, attunement, and discernment. I would say those are really some of the three like main pillars. And I think there's probably other things that come into that, but I think awareness of the pain, or awareness of things that don't feel good, or awareness of the patterns is like the first step in recognizing. It's like being aware that you are aware means that you bring consciousness to something that was otherwise unconscious, right? It's like bringing light to the dark. And then from there, if you're able to attune and feel into your own emotional signals, then you're able to taste emotional and energetic energy.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, if you're able to taste the energy, then you're able to discern, okay, I like this. This feels awful. But then from there, well, actually, that's more of the attunement. I like this. This feels awful. I would probably say is like really getting familiar with that. And perhaps the discernment, and I don't know, there's probably another piece here, but it's like knowing how to operate through like the holographic or like hall of mirrors that is life. Because what we're talking about is like learning how to not just confront or face the fears, but to walk through them, take action through them to get new evidence. And when you do that, like it can feel like you're dying. So there has to be some sense of discernment over knowing that this feels good. It feels more expansive. I'm also scared to death.
Right.
And then there's like, I think probably somewhere in there is like trust and surrender, that there is something good
Right.
calling you on the, like through the fear to the other side,
Right.
I guess is what I would say.
So I know that like when I experimented with talking to the, I hate saying rock person,
I
that,
mean,
I've been practicing my own awareness. Okay. So I've been doing my own, hanging out with my emotions and paying attention to it. So, okay. So I approach the situation with having that built up a little bit. And so I decided that I wanted to go talk to her. And then I begin to get the sensations of what it is and like a tuning into it. And one of the things that I noticed right away were very familiar emotions that I had kind of like encountered in other spaces. I was like, oh, okay. um, that I recognize inside myself as pretty young energies, right? I was
Mm-hmm.
just like, oh, okay. Like this feeling is a feeling I'm actually familiar with. And that I have moved through a few different times and in different ways. That's why I was curious to go to that threshold. Because I know that on the other side of that, the fear that is constituted and lives in that system is quite something. It really is a force to be reckoned with, and
Yeah.
to realize that, like, how powerful it actually is in the system, how it's set up currently. Okay. Right. So it's like, I think it's an example of being afraid of fear itself. Right. Because then I go through, my little practice, and other parts came up. And so I don't know if it was a sort of like, if I'm unraveling the knot at all, or learning something different. But I was learning that I could be safe, even if I went up and embarrassed myself, or just like wasn't affable or wasn't cool,
Mm-hmm.
that I was still safe. But it makes me think about, um, in those deep agreements of how those systems actually get set up, that fear absolutely is part of the equation that happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that on long timelines, like maintaining that same relationship to fear with all those, sort of like unquestioned assumptions, deep assumptions about how life goes, that's what makes, that quote that most men lead lives of quiet desperation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that the whole setup to begin with is to buffer yourself away from the fear. And the fear, I think, is like really abject, so it's like, I'm going to live my whole life with all of these subroutines all set up to keep me away from fear, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think that it can be understated about how much of a price that is to pay. Because it's like, it ends up being, and I know, like, I don't know if I could make like a from the hip sort of judgment call about like the amount to, or the extent to, fear is running my life, really. But I would say it's to a fairly high extent, you know, because it's like the fulcrum that all of these behaviors are built off of. You know?
Right. And it's interesting to think of fear as just something that doesn't really have consciousness. Like, I mean, it has consciousness. What I mean is, like, there's an aspect of like the unknown and fearing. It's like fear is really just a frequency or an energy of, oh no. Oh no. Like, I don't know what's gonna happen, like, to
Mm,
me. And it's usually like tied to something very existential, like death or humiliation, or but pretty much always leads to death of some sort, like humiliation, then I'm exiled, then I am alone, and then I get eaten maybe in the wild by something, or I don't have food, and then I die. So if you follow all of the, like, the chain of thoughts, it's like, then I die. So the fear is really in some ways necessary to keeping us, I think, like tethered to this reality. Like,
mm-hmm.
I think we need it in a way, so that we're not just trying to jump off buildings and be like, I can fly. Because, like, fear is definitely and I know, like, we had already had this discussion about like what fear is. Was that the last podcast? I think it was
Yeah,
the last one we
yeah.
did. We talked a lot about fear. So I don't want to go into that whole thing, but it truly is so deeply rooted and compelling that, yes, we can definitely construct our entire lives around avoiding um,
Well,
finding out the answer.
part of it makes sense to me, because I think that our initial relationship with fear gets set up when we are very young, when usually fear is an indication like it is a life and death situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at what point do you like, are you like as an adult, like thrust into being an individual, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
the stakes and the resources change dramatically, right? But the relationship with just that abject fear or like trying to be conscious of what we're actually afraid of, I don't, that's what I think maybe doesn't change, you know? So it's like we establish this like root relationship and then it doesn't
Mm.
get updated, you know what I mean?
Well, I think it's because like that comes down to all those parts of our personality that show up during those different times when things got real.
Hmm.
Like that there was an existential threat to life, limb, emotional, something, right?
Right.
So when the nervous system like detects that, then there's, I don't know if you consider it like a splitting off or dissociation or, just an aspect of personality that's created to step in to ensure survival at that age. And then it's like having all these different operating systems with these different ages inside of us, aspects of our personality that were formed because of a necessity at that time to survive a supposed threat. And it's like, was that a reality? Like, was the reality of an impending doom actually a reality, or was it just something that had to be assumed in the moment because it didn't have all the facts and it just didn't know?
Right.
Likely it didn't have all the facts and it just didn't know, and it didn't have a certain perspective because from birth until 25, like our brains aren't even fully formed. And then within that, we have different how the brain forms developmentally. There's just different things that we either have a grasp of or we don't. Like, I forget what the ages are. I think it's like before the age of 2, like children don't understand object permanence. And so you can
Right.
play peekaboo with them, and in their mind, like you're literally gone, but to them, you are gone.
Right.
And so that is that reality. So then you have to consider that there's all these different levels of consciousness inside of you interacting with life and looking for threats
Mm-hmm.
without having like the bigger picture.
Right.
And so each of those parts, like their relationship with fear is going to be based on their level of consciousness. And what we want to do is help upgrade them and bring them to a current reality, but one that isn't tethered necessarily to personality, but that's tethered to something that is infinite and unchangeable.
Right.
And that means taking lots of risks. And
Right.
yeah.
And I think too about like the biological imperative of the asymmetry of fear, right? It's like you only get one life. You know, it's like if you're put in mortal danger and then you die, it's like, and so part of our brains are wired
Yes.
absolutely to be seeing the danger instead of seeing the opportunity, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so as we as adults, right, begin to sort of like try to chip our way out of like this biological imperative, like all this learned stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we talk about awareness. What are some of the awarenesses, awareness practices?
Mm.
Like how would you begin to do that?
Ask me another way.
Okay. Well, actually, I wanted to go back to. I feel like I have a good hold on like the self-fulfilling prophecy idea. That seems
Mm-hmm.
pretty clear.
Yeah.
Um, Oh, and I also wanted to mention Trailheads was the guy who wrote the Parts book.
Oh, Dr. Richard Schwartz.
Yeah, he uses Trailheads too. He talks about that.
Yeah, he does for personalities, but I don't know if he says triggers or trailheads or if someone else says their
Yeah.
trailheads. But I know he uses trailheads as parts. But
I want to talk more about timelines. You talk about timelines and following certain impulses,
mhm.
right?
Yeah, so I watched this movie called Everything Everywhere All at Once. I don't
Okay.
know, like maybe a month ago, and it was so good. And it has Michelle, I think her last name is pronounced Yo.
Yeah.
Um, and basically, her character, she's kind of like thrust into this crazy situation where she has to like tap into her own like heroic impulse, but it's like so unlikely for her. And you start to see all of these like different timelines, like who she would have become if she had made different decisions during
Mm.
these different parts of her life. And then it's
Mm-hmm.
like all of those decisions have new decisions and new consequences. And then that goes out into infinity, and they're all occurring at once. So it's kind of like this quantum physics like model. It almost reminds me a bit of like, what's that Matthew McConaughey movie?
Interstellar,
Interstellar.
right?
Yeah, Interstellar, where it's like you see all the dimensions and like
Right.
everything's kind of happening at once. And there's all these like subtle differences. Well, it's kind of like that, but it's like it's just so very interesting where she has the capacity kind of to like create new dimensions, and which makes me think of like our capacity as creators to make something new and
Mm.
then go from there, kind of,
Right.
right? And so I think in the movie it's kind of taken to this like extreme place, which is very funny and it's very philosophical and it's very deep, and I feel like I want to watch it again. Like it's probably one of the best things I feel like I've seen in a long time. And of
Mm.
course I love stuff that's very like deep and metaphorical and philosophical,
Right.
and you know, just talking about like the universe and all these different things and about like what really matters. But it's like when you look at that, I think it gives us an opportunity to actually see someone living that life of quiet desperation. And then she has the opportunity, she has like that invitation, that initiation, like the hero's journey, and she almost doesn't take it. She
Right.
like tries to shy away from it, which I think is so human, because we're just like, I don't understand it, this is
Right.
scary, it's unknown,
Right.
also what the fuck is going on, right? But then it's like it becomes clear that her own existence is threatened. Like if she doesn't step up, she's got nowhere to go anyway. So it's almost out of like sheer like necessity that her,
Mm-hmm.
it's like she will either evolve or she will die. This
Right.
version of her will die. So she like steps up, and then you see her expansion as this character, but you also start to see her tap into these other timelines and use strengths and different things. And it's, anyway, I can't say enough good things about the movie, it's so good. But I think it gives us something to consider about how we want to live our lives. Like, do we want to answer the call and move beyond our fear and step into our own hero avatar, like to become the hero in the journey? Or do we want to like stay at the desk and not rock the boat, and we won't experience as much fear, but we're not going to experience much fun, excitement, adventure, anything that probably truly matters to us?
Well, I think
Truly.
if you don't step up, then that's the price that I was talking about, right? If fear stays where it is, like
Right.
that
It's a high
decision,
cost.
which is a decision, right? It's to like either step up and start to look around, especially like
Mm-hmm.
now, like, you know, I'm 40 years old. Like it's pretty easy for me to like say, like, I kind of know what I get now, right? Like I kind of like I know me, I know what the thing is, you know, like it's like I know like I know the song, right? I know the beats, I know how everything's going to go, right? I
Yeah.
pretty much know how it's going to go. Um, Getting to a precipice of actual change is, you know, so for me, it's scary. It really is scary. And so, like, you know, it's like I have
Right.
a very deep relationship with fear about like coming to terms with how powerful it is in my life. Well, it's like, newsflash, it's really fucking powerful. And it's not the old cliche shit that like it's never as bad as it is, you know, and honestly worrying about things and being sort of behind the gun, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I get the deep sense of like I know how this one goes. Like I know who I am if I just continue down this path. Like if I don't change, I know what I will get. Which is there
Right.
is a safety there. There absolutely is. There is a like a known there. But that's like that price I pay of continuing in the same direction, doing all the same things, and just being the self that I am now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a decision, and it comes with a cost. Yes, I get a lot of like safety out of it. Great.
Mm-hmm.
But is safety really like what I value in my life? Part of me does. Sure.
Yeah, because you need to like stay in the game with
I need to stay in the
this,
game. Right. But there's more, right? There is more. And
right?
and
And
beyond our boundaries and through our fears is where the gold lies, right?
yeah, I mean, just as you were talking, like what you're describing is a known timeline of like Groundhog's Day. Like that Bill Murray movie is so great because he ends up waking up and he knows what the day is going to be like over and over
Mm-hmm.
again. Also, like the movie, The Map of Tiny Perfect Things, it's like similar where they start to go, oh, this is going to happen at this time. This is going to happen at this time, right? And how we can actually create that like state of perpetuity,
Mm-hmm.
but we can also like interrupt it. And it's interesting to watch Bill Murray's character in Groundhog's Day because at first he's like, oh, fuck this day is happening over and over again. So he just tries to end it at first. He goes into like victimization and he goes down the emotional ladder into fuck this. I'm
Right.
going to end this shit. This is awful. And then once he realizes he can't die, he actually starts to move into confronting his fears and actually doing things differently, which he actually takes his power back and he moves through his deepest fears to break like the spell of Groundhog's Day into a new life,
Mm-hmm.
into interrupting that stale timeline of the known. And so there's so many movies like um, A Christmas Carol is a great example of a timeline. They literally, the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future show Ebenezer Scrooge what will happen if he continues down this path, what will happen if he does this, and what will happen if he does this. Right?
Right.
He's being shown, and it's also there was another movie that I thought of. It's a Wonderful Life is kind of like that too. I mean, actually, they do in a lot of movies where they're like, and because this is something that human beings do, we'll go like, oh, if I take this road, like I tend to kind of know what's going to happen here. But what do I like? I can follow my triggers and responses and reactions, kind of like Back to the Future is a cool one too, because you see different. You see Marty McFly, and he has inherited the opposite of his dad's trigger or his dad's fears is confrontation. Well, when Marty has confrontation come up, like when someone says, "What's the matter, McFly? Chicken?"
Right.
He's like, "No, I'm not a chicken." And he'll just say yes. And he'll just
Fly off.
he'll just fly off and just take the dare, take the whatever to like try to compensate. Like, I'm not weak. I'm not like my dad, but that's not healed. It's just the opposite. It's an overreaction to his dad's
Right.
underreaction.
But I think it's a
And then,
perfect example of like uh, conditioning of how that happens. He got into an emotional
right.
state. Somebody sort of presses his buttons, and instead
Yes.
of doesn't have the awareness to realize that where that decision is coming from is something very old, right? And so
Right.
takes him down that timeline, becomes a self-fulfilling, or not. It's just a
Yeah.
timeline thing, but
Well, no, it does become a self-fulfilling prophecy because in the second one, when he goes, he finds out how he lands into like financial ruin and
right.
he is able to hear what is like the cause of his undoing in
Mm-hmm.
the future. So then he has the awareness like, oh, it's this thing.
Right.
And so he's able to interrupt that pattern. So
Right.
it is kind of that story of saying, do I want to follow the story of my fears and my triggers? Because that will take me this way towards my ruin or towards that self-fulfilling prophecy, because fear is a certain frequency. And if we live that, then we recreate that. We end
Right.
up creating more fears and having more of those situations turn up. And
And I
then if
think
we're able
it. Sorry. Sorry. Go
if
ahead.
we're able to interrupt that, then we move forward and create an entirely new timeline, but one
Right.
that's aligned with our true power
Mm-hmm.
and creating in the unknown. But this time it's like a conscious co-creation.
Right. So I think about, okay, Marty got to go to the future to see that. Okay, we're not time travel. Well, we are time travelers, but I always think that one of the bellwethers of like that like piques my interest is a strong emotion, right? When a strong emotion comes up, usually like and around decisions, that to me now is like oh, something's happening, right? There's wheels in motion. There's things that are pulling me that really could take some more awareness and so like some more introspection, some more sitting with it. And I'm like, I'm not great at it, but like, my nose now it like peaks just a little bit. It's like, oh, something's happening, right? And it's so I'm being inflected or affected by things by more than what's just happening in front of me. And that's like, that's my cue to be like, okay, I need to go through my process of like sitting with this and sitting with it and like honestly just trying to listen and be affected by what the story actually is,
Yeah. So I realized when I was younger, I used to have a kind of interesting relationship with fear where I would just like jump into things and do crazy shit because I
Okay.
was kind of, I think, numb and a lot. I've just sort of been a daredevil, but I've also kind of been sort of numb where I was just able to push myself into things,
Okay.
which resulted in good, cool things and bad things, both. um, and what I was realizing is, I think I just lost my place. I don't remember what I was going to say.
You were young, you were impulsive, you were doing crazy shit.
Sounds like a song. So I've started to realize that being able to really like feel the fear and hold the space for it and to become unidentified with it, where I'm able to observe it as sensations in my body and to say, okay, this fear is a feeling, it's a sensation.
Right.
It's telling a story. Is this story true? Is this a predictor of the future? And it's like, no. But the other thing that I've come to know is that when I've felt really excited about a certain expansion or certain step that I'm like, this feels really good, this feels exciting. I've noticed that after that expansion will come like a really big contraction usually, because when I'm stepping into a new timeline, it's like every part of me that is not in vibrational resonance with that higher frequency will then rear up to kind of try to pull me back into safety.
Right.
Which is
backlash.
Right. Because, kind of like a backlash, or it's like you'll have this big expansion and you've moved into a new timeline. And then it's like kind of like the Venus flytrap that's just like closing. And it's like, it can be really easy to get caught back up in the illusion to be like, oh, see, it wasn't going to work, or it's not what I thought. But really what it's about is the new timeline that you're trying to get on. That can sort of feel like a rodeo bull that you're trying to hang on to that like higher frequency for dear life. But it's like your own like fears and your own stuff. Maybe the rodeo bull is like the fears and stuff, but you're like trying to stay on that higher frequency. I don't really know. It's not a perfect metaphor, but it's hard. It can be super challenging to stay in that expanded state and to keep like stay open, because you're going to do this and this a lot, and you're going to like expand and contract. Yeah. And it's you actually learning how to like recalibrate, to like feel into the triggers, to look into the fears and say, is this actually true? And then to get back into alignment again and again and again with your true self. But the fear is so very compelling, which I think we spoke about a lot. It's so very, because like it is tied to a certain reality. It's not saying like, oh, don't be afraid of heights, like you'll be fine. It's like, no, you actually have to consider some of those things. But when it comes to following your alignment, like that's something that you have to learn discernment around, like what inspiration feels like and expansion feels like that's something that we have to learn to tune into and start to trust, because we can have trauma around any emotion, period. Like I've had many experiences in my life where there was play or fun or a sense of success or triumph, and then very serious life or death circumstances happening around those things. So expansion, play, fun, success, not necessarily safe to my nervous system, but what do I
Oof.
actually desire? Fun, play, freedom, expansion,
Right.
success, I think like most people. But that my fears and my own sense of safety was like, no, don't do that. Don't go that way.
Right.
And then listening into those fears, like I would have my own um, knee-jerk reactions, responses where I would start on the higher timeline and then dip back down into
Mm.
another. So it's kind of like we're always surfing like our different timelines, trying to, on this journey, like we will always ride different emotional frequencies looking for that like sweet spot. And of course, like we need the contrast to know, yes, like more of this, please, or no,
Right.
fuck that, but we're still on this like human journey. So there's just a lot of layers to it.
It reminds me of the time I was out camping out in western Nebraska, out in this place, forest wildlife place, and there was nobody around. It was really awesome. I had a new camera. I had a new camera at the time, and I really was interested in night photography. I had read a little bit, but I was also a little bit locked up because it was like a full-fledged, full-blown camera, and it was a little bit complicated. I'm a little bit of a nerd, but I hadn't pushed through it yet. So I'd had it for like a few weeks or a month or something. So I took it out there, and one of the friends we happen to hang out with is a professional photographer, right? So this is like easy for him. And so we were out taking some photos, and he was actually composing some nighttime photos. It was really fun. And then I had my camera, so he's like, "Oh, here, you do this, put it in manual mode, do this." And then we took a few shots, and I got some awesome nighttime shots, and we got some awesome star shots, and we did a bunch of cool stuff. And that made me so happy. I was so happy. I was elated. We're out having fun at night, taking night photos. Like it's a bunch of guys together. We're like all having a good time. We had a great day, and it was just like, I really felt great. I was so joyous about that. Right. And I got super happy. Okay. And it's like, 1 o'clock, whatever, it's time to go to bed. So, and I think maybe this is our first night there, but I get inside the tent, I have my own tent out in the wilderness, and I like calm down and try to go to sleep, and fuck, like the contraction, here comes the contraction. And my contraction was I was going to get eaten by mountain lions. And so like I am just like laying there, and like I've camped before. It's like, is a cat gonna like worm its way through this like canvas bag to get me, the meat thing, without screaming? It's like no, like this part of like upper part of my brain is fine and like not necessarily scared, but my nervous system was freaking the fuck out. And I kind of knew that they were connected because I had gone so high and I had felt so joyous. It was really pure joy that I had felt. That now it was just like this, and it was such a
opposite.
It was really, really torturous. It really was
like a stark contrast. Like,
yeah, and it was such like
contrast.
a deep shaking. I wake up, but even now, just like telling the story, part of me is like I don't want to feel joy. Fucking keep it. If that's like the price that I have to pay, if that's the price that I have to pay, it's like, no, I'll just be boring forever. Right.
Right.
And that's a little rough, It's like,
yeah,
hanging my toes out over the edge. Like if that's like, it's what you described. And I would have to say that like it comports with my experience of experiencing joy or experiencing, an expansion, it's like, well, it's price too high. Oof.
Well, here's the interesting thing around that is that is also somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy, but I think it has to do with like perspective. Now, of course, in the natural cycle of things, like there are expansions and contractions, but I think in this case, what happened is you reached such a high level of resonance that when you kind of went back into maybe more of like your average resonating level of energy, you felt the contrast so starkly.
Yeah, because I exist, we'll say, in that lower state so often that I just have become sort of numb or used to it.
Right. But what
Yeah.
happened was you accessed something different, and it
Mm-hmm.
was this sense of pure elation, so that when
Mm-hmm.
you tapped into this higher frequency, so when you went back into the other one, it illuminated the stark
Mm-hmm.
contrast of
Okay.
your average resonating level of energy.
Right.
And then that was actually giving you more information, and as a creator you are powerful. And so that perspective, like, perspective follows state. So when you're in the fear,
Mm.
that fear also generates a perspective of victimization. I shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
have been so happy, these were the consequences.
Mm.
When in fact the happiness was actually able to help illuminate what your average existence had been like until you reached a higher peak, and that higher peak was showing you what's possible for your instrument,
Right.
that this is where you're meant to be and how you're meant to feel.
Aubrey Marcus had a guy on this week talking about marijuana, and they talked about their experiences of eating too much marijuana and like what that can do to you, right? And they were talking about, it giving you access to that. So I think about that because it's happened. It absolutely has happened to me, and it's happened to some of my friends. It's like it's usually eating a brownie or something that's too strong, right? And the place that it takes you to. But I tend to believe just through all my own experiences, and it also aligns with the point that you just made, that it's like there's some sort of contrast. It's not like that you ate the drug or you ate the brownie and then like it introduced a bunch of sort of negative emotions or negative fears into your
It's
being.
illuminating it.
It is illuminating what is already there. And the amount of use, and it's a lot of times it is very much fear based, right? Or uncomfortable. What are you uncomfortable about? There is some sort of question, and I think that it is all fear based about what is there, right? So, and I like what you said. It's like you get to experience this other place, and then it's the perspective of coming back out of that gave that extra dimensionality to the place that I already was.
Right.
So it's not that I like dip down lower. I actually just, maybe in this case, just got to more fully experience the place where I actually am, which I think that I would agree with that. Most of my life has been highly disassociated, right? And so I think that like I have clawed back some of my own feeling, but also I think that there's always that like baseline. The baseline doesn't move very fast, very quickly, So like I have some experiences, then I have the contrast and I have the vision. I'm able to see it from a different perspective, But but the baseline and all of the habituations that made me into the person that I am, I think it is tough to just like snap your fingers or have one thing happen and that baseline to
Right.
change.
Well, what I think is like kind of what's being illuminated is where it's possible for you to access those higher states, of course, but usually we have a lot of like baggage and lower vibrational, I want to say garbage. It's not necessarily garbage. It's just like an accumulation of
So
energy,
accumulation, yeah,
of like memories and traumas and like heavier, denser energies, that it's like we need to let go of these things if we want to rise and stay in that place, right?
right,
And so
right,
it's kind of like illuminating also what we need to let go of in order to be able to stay there more consistently. But I also think of it as if anyone's seen like the recent like Top Gun movies where he was testing like what Mach 10 or whatever. Have you seen it?
no,
It was really good. Well, anyway, if you think about a human moving through frequency like that quickly, that can be a real shock to the system because our
yeah,
bodies are used to like some form of homeostasis. But
right,
not only that, like we can become chemically addicted to
mm-hmm,
the neurohormones that are produced by, or like the emotional stuff. Like we can sort of be addicted to that like neurochemical cocktail that is
right,
our normal emotional experience.
right,
You have to consider that like detox can actually look pretty gnarly at first, because our physiology is actually changing as well as our frequency. And so when you let go of denser things, all organisms, life forms, and parasites or whatever that are lower vibrational that you picked up have got to go. And so like the fat cells and the memories and everything attached, like we are an entire living energetic organism. And so we have the 3D body that needs to move through into that new state. We're not just going to, it's me thinking of I don't know why I thought of that joke where it's like the kid on the back of the motorcycle and he's like, Daddy, his name is whatever. And he's like, Daddy, go faster. And eventually the dad like speeds up and he's like, Daddy, too fast, is that joke. But I just think of us trying to hit this, like to go from 0 to Mach 10 is so is to put a lot of pressure, too much pressure on the evolution of the human being. And like just in reading some of the Gene Keys stuff, like this idea that has just really been interesting to my brain is that God is pressure. But I'm thinking if God is pressure, but is also ultimate kindness, compassion, empathy, all of these things, then the ultimate kindness is to apply right pressure and not too much pressure to evolve or have to move in that moment. And so it's like finding the sweet spot of alignment where we, on our journey, like do the hard things, but we don't like torture ourselves with trying to like make everything happen at once, because it would just be too much. Like that would be unkind. Right. Have to like let go of this entire other paradigm, especially if we were so used to living in victimization. There's so many changes, like energetically, physiologically, biochemically, that are happening to our organism that we have to consider. So I just think it can be a lot of change at once. And the physical realm is slower than light energies and those kind of things.
And I think that, I fall prey to that a little bit, that I can get the sense of my own boundaries and, the matrices of the own fear that lives in my being. Right. And, I can get unlovingly sort of like critical of that, or like desirous of something else, which is,
do you mean like not wanting, like feel like, why is like critical of being so afraid or wanting to be anywhere else but in that place?
Just why am I me? Why me? Right.
Because it's uncomfortable.
It is uncomfortable. And I think about the thresholds that if I want something different in my life, that I'm going to have to like go through, and just even thinking about it now is like deeply terrifying.
Right. And I also think that that can come from perspective of those parts that have still associated expansion and joy with punishment to some degree, meaning that it, like, to some sense, I feel like there's a relation to like being joyous costs you something.
Right.
And that might point to a pattern in your childhood or past where you had moments of pleasure, elation, fun, play, and then had a very strong juxtaposition of like punishment energy or something very bad happening, which I feel like happens to a lot of people. And then we attach the meaning that like joy is not safe, or when I do this, it's not worth it.
Right.
Because then this happens. And then it's important to step outside and say, what is the definition, or like the paradigm that I've created as the universe? Like, what kind of universe, like how have I defined the universe, and is it serving me or not serving me in my own like journey of just like happiness and evolution? Right. And if you are feeling shitty, like something I picked up from one of my mentors, Leah Lake, and I think she's done some brilliant work with like masculine, feminine energy relationships, but something she said that always stuck with me. and I've learned to overlay that into other areas. She said that any relationship that you're in should feel good 90% of the time. And when I thought about that, I was thinking our relationship with ourselves should feel really good most of the time. Our relationship like with the universe should feel good most of the time. Like we are meant to feel good and feel happy, and we're still meant to experience contrast. But something that Esther Hicks talks about a lot, or Abraham Hicks, is that we live in a universe of like contrast, and that we need the contrast to create, but that the overall vibration of the planet, of the universe, is that, and us, is of well-being. And so when we're not experiencing a primary state of well-being, then that means that we're focused in another direction, which makes a lot of sense. Because if everything is energy, is on frequencies, then if fear being a frequency, which they mentioned in like the gene keys, but also like Dr. David Hawkins' works talks about that like Hertz scale, like the emotional resonance. There are different levels of emotional resonance that we experience, and then those dictate how we feel. They dictate our states. They dictate the origin of our thoughts. And when we accumulate lots of memories and perspectives in these different personalities and parts, then we have what Dr. Bruce Schneider from IPEC would call an average resonating level of energy, which is like your baseline on the day in to day out, which is you as a conglomeration of all your consciousness. And then and then also where you go, like when you're in a triggered state. So many of us might find ourselves living in a very narrow existence of meh. And then when shit gets real, we're in hell. But we're not really able to break through as much into these higher synchronous, very elated places. And it's I think because of our the trauma that we have around approaching and confronting fear and anger, I feel like are two really important like gateways, or I would even say initiations into like moving into like higher energy or different things.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
Dig it.
Yeah. Was there anything else that we didn't cover? I think
Timelines and self-fulfilling prophecies. I don't know.
I mean,
That seems like
sort of a broad topic, and
yeah.
like enough, but also
I mean, it's definitely some shit to chew on, It's got me thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess the only other thing I was just thinking of was like that I wanted to underline, I guess, for a second time, is just to really consider our evidence that we have and find out where those decisions and those life experiences and even our perspectives, like what energy are we looking at those things through? And like we need to measure that with like what truth, like truth with a capital T is. We need to say, is this story that I've bought into, is this paradigm, is the definition of love or this universe, is this true? Because being able to dismantle some of the lies within that can really hold the keys to our freedom and our ability to move beyond those things. And it can be so very sneaky because when we're conditioned a certain way, it's like we don't know that we're in water, or if we're in a small fish tank, we're like, yeah, this is the way it is, and we can just have loads of like fish poop that we just, yep, seen that turd before, yep, and that one too, I've named that turd Dolly, and it's like just going around again, hey Dolly. And it's just like you're still swimming in the same shit, but it isn't until you have that experience of higher consciousness where you're like, holy shit, there's a whole ocean. I don't have to live in this shit-filled tiny bowl. Like there's other levels up. Like my next step up could be like a bigger aquarium, and now it's clean. And then there's like the ocean. There's like so many possibilities. And so when we find ourselves in this place of like no hope, no possibility, life is shit, then we have to consider that the very perspective that's feeding that narrative is one that is wounded and disconnected from the higher truth or the higher perspective, much like a parent that goes into the room with the child and the child said, there's a monster under my bed. And actually, they have a higher perspective and they look, and of course, unless it's like an episode of like Stranger Things or something like that, there is no monster, right? And they're looking. But anyway, I feel like that's a whole other topic because that makes me think about attunement and stuff like that. But basically in this scenario, there is no monster, okay? And the
Right.
child is afraid that there's a monster due to something.
Right.
And it's literally having the perspective to say, hey, look, there's no monster here. You're safe. And oftentimes with like some of these adult parts is even when they are brought up to present day, it's like other humans aren't necessarily reliable and don't instill the same kind of trust and whatever. It literally has to be source energy, like capital S self energy, like divine energy. Like that is actually the only constant field of like limitless potential and possibility and love and compassion and all of those things. So the answer is to go back to that well again and again and again and allow that energy to illuminate the darkness of these other lower vibrational energies, like allow it to touch them and invite them to rise. So that's what I would say. It's an invitation to see things differently and to start taking some risks towards shit that you actually want, like cooler shit.
Right. Different shit.
Right. Yeah. So
righteous.
Great.
Well, thanks for hanging out. Check us out on our show socials. Leave a comment. Say hi. Ask us questions. All that stuff.
Yeah, questions, comments. We'd love reviews, shout outs, and we'll see you next time.
Cool. Thank you, Angela.
Bye.
Bye.